Today we're diving deep into the life and legacy of, well, Abraham Lincoln, of course.
Of course.
Um, you're looking to go beyond the surface level, right? Beyond the log cabin and the penny image, to really understand the man behind the legend, his political complexities and
Right.
his enduring impact on America. We've got some great sources to guide us, including, well, excerpts from his biographies and
Yeah.
historical records.
It's gonna be a fascinating journey.
Yeah.
Lincoln's story is one of a remarkable transformation from humble beginnings
Right.
to becoming a leader who, well, shaped the course of a nation.
Let's start with those humble beginnings,
Okay.
shall we? Born in a log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, Lincoln's early life wasn't exactly paved with privilege.
Not at all.
Right.
His frontier upbringing in Kentucky and later Indiana,
Yeah.
had a profound impact on him. Limited formal education. Yet he was a voracious reader, driven by a thirst for knowledge. He worked hard, taking on jobs like splitting rails and working on a riverboat, all the while teaching himself law.
It's interesting how that early experience of hard work and self-reliance seems to have laid the groundwork for his later successes.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, his early political career started in Illinois, right,
That's right.
as a state legislator, then a U.S. congressman.
That's right. And during this time, he championed infrastructure projects like the Illinois and Michigan Canal,
Okay.
connecting communities, fostering economic growth.
Yeah.
That seemed to be a key focus for him.
That seems like an interesting parallel to his later efforts to unite a fractured nation.
Mm-hmm.
But what about his stance on the defining issue of the era, slavery? I know Lincoln is revered as the great emancipator, but how did his views evolve over time?
That's where things get really nuanced.
Okay.
Lincoln's position on slavery was complex
All right.
and reflected the political climate of the time. While personally opposed to slavery, he didn't initially support immediate abolition.
Hmm.
In his early career, he favored gradual emancipation and even supported the idea of colonization,
Colonization.
resettling freed slaves in Africa.
Wow.
He was walking a tightrope, trying to find common ground in a deeply divided nation.
So his views were more pragmatic than we might assume, driven by the realities of the political landscape.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this pragmatism was further challenged by the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854.
Okay.
This act, which allowed territories to vote on whether to allow slavery, reignited the debate with a vengeance
Right.
and ultimately pushed Lincoln back into the political arena.
Didn't this act lead to violence and chaos in Kansas?
Absolutely. It was a tinderbox,
Yeah.
and for Lincoln, it was a turning point. He saw this act as a betrayal of the nation's founding principles and a dangerous expansion of slavery.
Right.
This is when he joins the newly formed Republican Party, a party dedicated to halting slavery's spread.
So this is where he makes a decisive break from his earlier, more moderate stance.
Yes. He becomes a vocal advocate for limiting slavery, and his eloquence and reasoned arguments gained national attention during the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858.
The Illinois Senate race.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Where he debated Stephen Douglas, a prominent pro-slavery Democrat.
Right.
I know he lost that election, but wasn't it a pivotal moment for Lincoln?
Absolutely. While he may have lost a Senate seat, those debates propelled him onto the national stage. They showcased his sharp intellect, his ability to dissect complex issues, and his unwavering commitment to the principles of freedom and equality. It's during this campaign that he delivers his famous House Divided speech,
Right.
a powerful indictment of slavery and a warning about the perils of a nation divided against itself.
I remember learning about that speech in school, but I'd love to hear a bit more about it.
Sure.
What made it so impactful?
What's fascinating about the House Divided speech is how Lincoln connects his arguments to the core principles of the Declaration of Independence. He argued that the nation couldn't endure permanently half slave and half free. It had to become all one thing or all the other.
Wow.
It was a stark warning,
Yeah.
a foreshadowing of the conflict that would soon engulf the nation.
And this all leads to that pivotal year, 1860, and the presidential election that changed everything.
Yes. The 1860 election was a watershed moment in American history. Lincoln secured the Republican nomination and ultimately won the presidency, but with a crucial distinction.
I remember reading that he didn't receive a single electoral vote from a southern state.
Exactly.
Wow.
His victory was entirely due to northern votes, a clear sign of the deep divisions that already existed in the country. The South saw Lincoln's election as an existential threat, a direct attack on their way of life, and they weren't willing to accept it.
So when Lincoln takes office, the nation is already teetering on the brink of civil war.
Absolutely. His election was the catalyst. Within months, 7 southern states seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. The nation was fractured. Was about to become a reality.
Knowing how this story unfolds, it feels like Lincoln was walking into an impossible situation. And even though he opposed slavery's expansion, wasn't he still willing to compromise to save the Union?
He was. In his first inaugural address, he even stated that he had no intention of interfering with slavery where it already existed.
Mm.
He was willing to support a constitutional amendment protecting slavery in the existing slave states.
Okay.
His primary goal at that point was to preserve the Union, to hold the nation together.
Right.
But as we know, events spiraled quickly out of control.
This deep dive is definitely taking us into some turbulent waters. So just weeks after Lincoln's inauguration, Confederate forces fire on Fort Sumter, marking the beginning of the Civil War. From small-town lawyer to a wartime president facing the greatest crisis in American history.
Right.
What a leap.
Indeed.
Right.
And leading the Union through the Civil War would test Lincoln's abilities as a leader, strategist, and ultimately as a unifier in ways he could never have imagined.
So here we are, Lincoln thrust into this unimaginable situation, a nation at war with itself. He's grappling with the immense responsibilities of leading the Union Army while also, trying to navigate the complex political landscape of a wartime nation.
It was a balancing act of unprecedented proportions. He had factions within his own party pushing for different approaches, some advocating for swift and harsh measures against the South, others urging for reconciliation and a more lenient approach.
Right. And then there's the war itself, the military strategies, the decisions about generals, the weight of those choices. It must have been an incredible burden.
One of Lincoln's most significant early decisions was implementing a naval blockade of southern ports. It was a strategic move, really, that crippled the Confederate economy by cutting off vital trade routes.
Makes sense. But weren't there also some more controversial decisions? I'm thinking specifically about his suspension of habeas corpus, which allowed for the detainment of individuals suspected of disloyalty without trial.
That's right. It was a wartime measure that sparked debate and remains controversial to this day. Some saw it as a necessary step to protect national security, while others viewed it as a dangerous infringement on civil liberties.
It's fascinating how those tensions between national security and individual liberties still resonate today. But let's talk about another pivotal decision, one that redefined the war and Lincoln's legacy. The Emancipation Proclamation. I think most people have heard of it, but its significance and complexities often get overlooked.
The Emancipation Proclamation, issued in 1863, is indeed a document of immense historical importance. It declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory would be forever free.
But it didn't free all slaves in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Didn't it specifically exclude slaves in states that remained loyal to the Union?
That's a key point. The proclamation was carefully crafted. It only applied to areas in rebellion against the United States, not to the slave states that remained within the Union.
So why not just free all slaves outright? What was Lincoln's strategy there?
There were several factors at play. Lincoln had to consider the delicate balance of power within the Union. He needed to keep border states, which allowed slavery but remained loyal to the Union, on his side. A blanket emancipation could have pushed them towards the Confederacy.
So it was a calculated move, both militarily and politically.
Exactly. But it also had a profound moral impact, It shifted the focus of the war, making it not just about preserving the Union, but about ending slavery. It was a turning point, a beacon of hope for enslaved people, and a powerful message to the world that the United States was committed to the cause of freedom.
This must have had a significant impact on the war effort itself.
It did. It energized the abolitionist movement in the North, and it discouraged European powers from supporting the Confederacy. It made it clear that the war was about something much bigger than just states' rights or economic interests.
It's incredible to think about the ripple effects of that single document.
It changed the course of history. But amidst all this, Lincoln was also facing a re-election campaign in 1864, a campaign that would take place in the midst of a bloody and divisive war.
Not exactly an ideal time for a re-election bid.
Right.
Who was he running against?
His opponent was George McClellan, a former Union general whom Lincoln had fired for his overly cautious approach to the war.
That must have made for some interesting campaign dynamics.
It certainly did. The Democrats, with McClellan at the helm, campaigned on a platform of peace and reconciliation, appealing to those who were weary of the war and its mounting casualties.
But Lincoln ultimately won a second term. How did he manage that?
A number of factors contributed to his victory. Crucially, key Union victories in the fall of 1864 bolstered his chances. Voters saw that the tide was turning in favor of the Union. And Lincoln himself campaigned tirelessly, appealing to the nation's desire for unity and a lasting peace.
So people were tired of war. But they also saw that Lincoln was the leader who could see them through to victory.
Exactly, and his victory paved the way for the final push toward Union victory. Within months, General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War.
A moment of immense relief, but also, as you mentioned earlier, a time for reckoning.
Right.
The nation was deeply scarred. How did Lincoln approach the daunting task of rebuilding and reconciling a nation torn apart by war?
This is where we see Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction, a vision marked by compassion and a desire for unity. He believed in a lenient approach, emphasizing forgiveness and reconciliation rather than punishment or retribution.
Wasn't there a famous quote that encapsulated his approach? Something about letting them up easy.
You're thinking of his phrase, "let 'em up easy," which reflected his desire to reintegrate the South into the Union without further bloodshed or resentment.
That seems like a stark contrast to the views of the radical Republicans in Congress, who wanted to punish the South and ensure full civil rights for freed slaves.
It was a delicate balancing act. Lincoln wanted to bring the South back into the fold, but also recognized the moral imperative of protecting the newly emancipated slaves. He supported the passage of the 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery in the United States.
Landmark achievement, no doubt. But as we know, tragedy struck before he could fully implement his vision for Reconstruction.
Just days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, at Ford's Theater. It was a devastating blow to a nation already reeling from years of war and division.
It's hard to grasp the profound sense of loss that must have swept through the nation.
It was a national tragedy. Lincoln's death transformed him into a martyr, a symbol of unity and freedom, and his legacy took on an even more profound meaning.
I'm curious, how has Lincoln's image evolved over time? He's consistently ranked as one of the greatest presidents, but has his legacy been reinterpreted or challenged in different historical periods?
That's a great question. Lincoln's image has indeed been shaped and reshaped over time, reflecting changing social and political contexts. During the Civil Rights Movement, for example, his legacy was invoked by activists fighting for racial equality. And in more recent times, there's been greater scrutiny of his views on race and his actions during the war.
So his legacy remains complex and open to interpretation.
It does. But even with this ongoing dialogue and reassessment, his commitment to the ideals of freedom, equality, and unity continues to inspire. And his words from the Gettysburg Address, delivered at the dedication of a national cemetery honoring the fallen soldiers, continue to resonate powerfully.
You're referring to the famous line that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from this earth.
Yes, it's a timeless expression of the principles of democracy, and it encapsulates Lincoln's unwavering belief in the power of the people.
It's amazing how those words still hold such power and relevance today.
They do. And they serve as a reminder of the ideals that Lincoln fought for, ideals that continue to shape our nation and inspire people around the world.
We've explored his political journey, his leadership during a time of unimaginable crisis, and his enduring legacy. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more aspect of Lincoln's story I'd like to touch on: his personal life.
Ah, yes, the man behind the myth. Lincoln was known for his dry wit, his folksy charm, and his deep melancholy. His marriage to Mary Todd was famously tumultuous, and he suffered the devastating loss of 2 sons during his lifetime.
These personal struggles add another layer to his story. They remind us that he wasn't just an iconic figure, but a human being grappling with the same joys and sorrows that we all face. It makes him all the more relatable, even across centuries.
It does, yeah.
It really does, yeah. To think of this towering figure of history also dealing with personal loss and the complexities of family life.
It certainly does, and I think it speaks to his resilience and empathy. He knew hardship, he understood suffering, and I believe that shaped his approach to leadership and his vision for a nation healing from a devastating war.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from his humble beginnings to his presidency during one of the most, tumultuous periods in American history. But as we wrap things up, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
It's a good question. I think it's important to remember that Lincoln, despite his iconic status, was a product of his time.
Mm.
His views on slavery, on race, on the role of government, they were all shaped by the social and political context of the 19th century.
And we've seen that evolution throughout our exploration, haven't we? From his early political career in Illinois to his presidency during the Civil War. He wasn't always the great emancipator we often envision.
Precisely. And I think understanding that nuance is crucial.
Yeah.
It allows us to see him as a human being wrestling with complex issues and making difficult choices, rather than just a figure frozen in marble.
It makes his accomplishments all the more remarkable, doesn't it? To navigate a deeply divided nation through a brutal war and ultimately bring about the end of slavery. It's an incredible legacy.
It is, and it's important to note that he faced constant opposition, both from within his own party and from those who vehemently disagreed with his policies.
Right.
It speaks to his strength of character, his political acumen, and his unwavering commitment to the principles he believed in.
And those principles,
Right.
freedom, equality, unity, they continue to shape our nation today, don't they? Lincoln's legacy is woven into the fabric of American democracy. From the Lincoln Memorial to the countless schools, streets, and towns that bear his name, it's a testament to his enduring impact on our national consciousness.
Absolutely. He's become a symbol of hope, of resilience, of the possibility of achieving great things, even in the face of adversity.
So as we conclude our deep dive into the world of Abraham Lincoln, what's one final thought, one lingering question we can leave our listener with? Something to ponder as they continue their own exploration of this complex and captivating figure.
I think a question worth considering is this. How might Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction have impacted the course of American history had he lived?
Right.
His approach to healing the nation, his emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation, would it have led to a more just and equitable society in the aftermath of the Civil War?
That's a question that historians continue to debate, isn't it? We can only speculate on what might have been, but exploring those possibilities helps us understand the complexities of Reconstruction and the challenges of rebuilding a nation after a period of such profound division.
And perhaps it encourages us to reflect on our own roles in shaping a more just and equitable future, doesn't it? Drawing inspiration from Lincoln's commitment to those ideals.
Well said. It's been a fascinating journey through the life and times of Abraham Lincoln. We've uncovered hidden depths, explored complex issues, and hopefully inspired our listener to keep digging deeper into the rich tapestry of history.
I always enjoy a good deep dive,
Yeah.
and I trust our listener did too.
Yeah,